And so knowing that this started out originally as My Paper Route and Other Deadly Things, how much did changing from kidnapped children to kidnapped dogs impact you? What still remains consistent about the story? Or are we now talking about a whole new animal?
Um, you would think it was a huge revision. Like it was an overhaul, but there were a lot of things that I was able to keep. And one of the things, like Carrie said when she read it, that she felt like the secondary characters were problematic. And it's probably because they kept getting kidnapped. Like they couldn't stick around because they were getting swiped as part of the story. And so once they stuck around, I was able to develop their relationship a little bit more. So that played a huge role. I had to make sure that this cast got developed, and but some of the things remained the same. I do remember Carrie, one of the revisions she wanted me to make after I became her client was she felt like some of the stakes had lessened a little bit because, kidnapping, that's high stakes. Kids missing, that's a pretty big deal. And so she felt like it needed a little bit more weight. And so she wanted me to make it clear what was going on with these dogs so that you could see how scary it was. And so I added like a newspaper article that addressed some of the things that were happening to the dogs, like the dog fighting and the breeding. I think I talked about like a place that had been busted where they were breeding dogs, and there were all these little dogs kept in crates. And then I added this series of scenes where the kids are in an abandoned amusement park where they stumble upon where they're holding the dogs for dog fights. And it's interesting because that scene that Carrie, and she didn't suggest what I add, she just said I needed to add something to increase the stakes so they could see what was going on and what could happen to these dogs. And so I added those scenes, and that still is like one of my favorite series of scenes are the abandoned amusement park scene. And that's because Carrie was like, you've got to increase the stakes now that it's not kids anymore. So yeah.
And obviously with, it's a book that's for everybody, but intended or being at least targeted to a middle grade audience. It's not like you can, put the dogs in torture devices and it suddenly becomes a Saw movie for a couple of chapters. There are lines you can't cross. So how do you keep the stakes consistently high, not only for this first mystery, but now a second as well, without crossing some of those lines?
Oh, I think that the editors are the ones that tell me that I can't cross lines because I think I try to make it as scary as I can. I think I've gotten better at like knowing what my limit is, but in the second book, I just got some edits back and my editor was like, so you talk about, like I was describing a comic book, the cover of a comic book, and I talked about how like the vigilante had the lifeless body of the lady slung over his shoulder. And she was like, yeah, lifeless isn't good. You need to change that. That's too scary. And I was like, really? And so sometimes it surprises me what they asked to change and what actually goes through. Because sometimes things that I think, okay, this is really scary, they don't touch it. But then other things like that, like lifeless, it's like, no, you've got to change that. Kind of surprised me. So honestly, I just think that I try to make it as scary and as although I do have boundaries because I have kids and I read to my kids all the time, and I used to know like when things were getting too much, and so I do have my own internal barometer, I guess. But I'm grateful for an editor who knows the market well enough that she's like, whoa there, and I'll listen to her. Usually.
Most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time.
Well, something you might not be able to answer this or might not want to, but I'm going to ask it, and you can just say I don't want to reveal my secrets. But if you've got something where it's on the edge a little bit and you really want to include it, do you then write something else that's far beyond that so that the editor has something easy that they can ask you to cut, and then that preserves your thing that's a little bit on the edge?
No, but I'll have to do that now. That's a good strategy. I'll write that down. Note to self.
If you could cut the serial killer murders 3 kids scene, that'd be great. What about Lifeless? No, Lifeless is fine. Keep that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Oh, but you know what? This is funny because this is actually, so I got the idea for Kazu Jones and the Denver Dognappers because my 3 kids all had paper routes. And so we were all getting up early in the morning and doing the same thing that Kazu was. I was driving them around because it's really dark and cold in Idaho Falls. And so I based a lot of what happened on the paper route on what happened with my kids. And there was actually a super spooky house on my daughter's route that I based Geezer's house on. It looked exactly the same and like enshrouded with trees, and it was painted dark brown, and they never left their lights on, and it was super spooky. Which since that house has been sold and they've re-landscaped it and it's a whole new house, and it makes me kind of sad that it's not spooky anymore. But one of the details from book 1 I took from an actual story here in Idaho Falls. There was a little girl. So back in the day, the local paper used to make kids collect money from the customers, and they'd have to go collect payments, which is ridiculous to make them collect payments from these grown-ups. But this one girl actually disappeared, and she was killed by this crazy guy on a route. And I allude to that in the first book, and I think I may have said that she was killed in like the first version, and then my editor was like, "Oh no, you cannot say anything about what happened to her." So I think I ended up saying that she disappeared, but still, that's scary. That's still pretty scary. But that actually is based on a real thing that happened here in our county, and they stopped that practice of having kids collect money because of that.
That's crazy.
I know. And I was like, but it really happened. And my editor was like, I don't care. It's too scary. And I was like, okay.
Killed, you know what happened, disappeared. She could be part of a strange scientific experiment to this day.
Exactly. Or aliens.
Sure.
You never know.